Imagine being able to predict the UK's next biggest comedian 10 years in a row. Chances are they're playing at a specific underground comedy night in South London. It's where the pros like Catherine Tate, Jack Whitehall, Kevin Bridges, Stephen Merchant, James Acaster and Josh Widdicombe go to practice their material before playing at sellout venues like the O2 and live at the Apollo. James Gill started writing about Crystal Palace for the Croydon Advertiser.
Was the Crystal Palace correspondent.
He then went into full-time comedy, working on shows like Harry Hill's Clubnite, the Jonathon Ross Show, the John Bishop Show, and even featuring on the Graham Norton Show.
It's James Gill who runs this brilliant comedy club called Always Be Comedy.
Now he runs his own night, Always Be Comedy.
This multi-award-winning comedy night.
He is probably your favourite comedian's favourite comedian. I would go to the ends of the earth to share a stage with James Gill. The most impressive live presenter I have ever seen. If you want to understand the business of comedy and what goes on behind the scenes into making great comedians, you need to watch this interview. James, welcome to Jimmy's Jobs of the Future.
I feel like I'm on Zach Galifianakis's Between Two Ferns. I can just about make you out through the foliage. I've never done an interview in a hedge before, but I'm here for it. I like it. Yeah.
Definitely go on the YouTube to see the foliage for it. I also think it might be the first James that we've had on the show. First Jimmy. Why did you not go with calling yourself Jimmy?
Do you know what? My mum would be furious. So if someone called me Jim or Jimmy as a kid, she would always go, sorry for banging that glass, she would always go, his name is James, actually. And I suppose I never want to upset my mum. I sometimes I get a pang for a Jim or a Jimmy, and occasionally I will get a Jimmy, and I don't mind it. But I've always stuck with James. I reckon my mum will listen to this as well, so she'll be delighted that I've revealed why I've always stood by James. By the way, if you call me Jimmy, I would never say my name is James. And I've got my mum on speed dial.
Jimmy Gill.
Jimmy Gill sounds all right, I reckon.
Yeah.
I'm sort of in it now, though.
Yeah, exactly. And so what's your job?
Jesus, wet. My wife would say, "What isn't?" Because I've sort of
yeah.
So we're here at Always Be Comedy. So Always Be Comedy is a room above a pub. The pub is the Tommyfield in Kennington. Now, Always Be Comedy, sort of not for me to say this, but I will. Always Be Comedy is this multi-award-winning comedy night where the likes of Kevin Bridges, Stuart Lee, Harry Hill, Sarah Pascoe, Romesh Ranganathan, Aisling B, Brett Goldstein, on and on and on and on. You know, in the past couple of weeks alone, we've had Acaster a couple of times, Stuart Lee a couple of times. Stuart Lee's back here tomorrow. You know, Sarah Pascoe's been here twice in the past week and a bit. Brett Goldstein, 2-time Emmy winner, has been here twice in the past week. The reason why I'm naming all these names is because I think punters turn up here expecting to be blown away by like the glamour of Wembley, and they walk into what is, you know, let's face it, a very small room. So we are here 4, 5, you know, maybe some weeks even 6 times a week. We just put on as many shows as we can. So I launched this night 12 years ago. I also MC the night. I mean, it's an absolute labour of love. I've earned this hairline. So I do that. I write on some TV shows. I warm up on some TV shows. So I always, I don't know about you, if I'm not working, I feel like this pang of guilt, you know. James Guilt, that's what, forget, Jimmy Guilt, that should be the new,
Jimmy Gill.
That's the new show, isn't it? Oh, and then we launched the Always Be Comedy podcast.
Yes.
A few weeks ago, so I think we're on like episode 17. Well, it depends when this comes out, I suppose. So that was just another thing to add to the workload, I suppose.
And yeah, and it's great. And it's really, you've done, loads of people have podcasts now, right? It's like a big joke, but yours is framed around the perfect comedy evening as well, which I'm going to ask you about later as well.
Right.
Because I think it's a really interesting concept that you've got there. What was your first job?
Crikey. So I was a sports journalist.
Yeah.
So I, straight out of uni, got a job at a company called sports.com in Leeds. and that was a good gig. I got moved to now. God, I'm so sorry that I'm bringing my mum back into this. So I was, good working class boy from a working class family in Leeds. So I was raised to believe, and this I hope this is helpful for listeners. I was raised to believe you get a steady job.
Yeah.
So my childhood dream of being a comedian, absolute flim flam. That's not a steady, reliable job. So I got a job as a sports journalist. So you can feel like the whole family going, now that is what you call a reliable job. And then proceeded to work for every single company that folded. Because, journalism is... journalism, it's not a hot take. Journalism is essentially dead because people bemoan the death of brilliant journalism, but they don't want to pay for the journalism.
Yeah.
So is it Brian Glanville, the fabled sports writer in the 1970s, went undercover in Italy, this great British sports writer, to expose corruption in Italian football, which is regarded as like one of the great pieces of sports journalism. If you were to pitch that to a sports editor now, he'd have you escorted off the premises.
Yeah.
Because the cost for that, they could pay for hundreds of online articles that would get the click. So I worked for sports.com. They folded during that great crash, the dot-com crash of 2002, folded on the first day of the World Cup, 2002. Imagine that. But then I went to the Croydon Advertiser, and I was the Crystal Palace. This has been a great source of comedy material down the years. I was the Crystal Palace correspondent, home and away from about 02 to 05. I barely missed. I'm from Leeds. The accent is barely there. But because of this job, Stockholm Syndrome took hold. And I just fell in love, like head over heels with Crystal Palace. You get to know the players, get to know the coaches, get to know the people that work there. And then, to come full circle, one of the guys who saved Crystal Palace, a guy called Stephen Browett, him and his sons come to Always Be Comedy, and they've been coming here for a few years. And so they very kindly invite me to sit in the director's box. I mean, it's so sweet. I'm always very grateful. But it's lovely to still have that affiliation with the club. We live near Sellers Park. My two girls, whether they like it or not, have been raised as Crystal Palace fans because I want them to know what true suffering is.
Build resilience early. Yeah.
Build resilience. And then from there, I freelanced at all sorts of places. I was a sports writer at the London paper. That was a great gig. So we'd get the paper out, and then in the afternoon, I might spend an afternoon with Jack Nicklaus. I might have a golf lesson with Justin Rose, or I'd go spend time with Usain Bolt at the O2 Arena, and then on the night I might be covering Chelsea in the Champions League, and that was a phenomenal gig. And then that folded, and then I went to Shortlist, and then went freelance from Shortlist. Sorry, this is my full CV. My internal monologue's like, what a life you've lived. And then I was deputy editor at a wellness magazine called Balance, and what happened there was I was quite experienced by the time I went to Balance, and I was sort of like, a bit like when Gary McAllister joined Liverpool. I'm really adding romance to this. So because I like good contacts, so this magazine I think I'm like blown away because I got them like Denzel Washington and Chris Hemsworth and like proper Hollywood A-listers, and I launched a podcast for them. So I probably think that helped it, gave me a bit of experience before launching the ABC podcast. And then when we went full time with Always Be Comedy once lockdown kicked in, so we went on lockdown.
So that was the moment that sparked it then. Well,
that was I mean, to be honest with you, that was the big turning point for Always Be Comedy, because we were a weekly comedy night on a Thursday. We might put on the odd extra show, because I was juggling so many other things, like various freelance journalism things. The warm up, I was emceeing at other places. I was a resident MC at the 99 Club, so always a busy boy. But then when we went into lockdown, obviously all that's off, and so we started putting on these online nights, and it just grew and grew and grew to the extent where Monday night we did a show with Al Murray's Lockdown Lock-In. Tuesday Night Club with Rachel Price and Marcus Brigstock. Wednesday was the main Always Be Comedy online night, and then we were putting on extra shows here and there for the likes of Romesh Ranganathan, because he wanted to run through things, Frankie Boyle, because he wanted to run through things. So we're putting on so many online shows, and then what happened? We came out of lockdown, And Tim, my other half at ABC, we said to each other, well, why don't we stop doing all these other shows for other places everywhere else?
Sure.
Why don't we put on loads more shows that would be comedy? And so we sort of, I mean, I say this while performing the sign of the cross, we sort of never looked back. And so then we went from being a weekly comedy night here to being, as I say, we try to put on as many as we humanly can, really.
And I've written so many notes to come back to that first question about what was your first job, where you...
Yeah, sorry, I really launched into...
You really did. Like,
you must have been thinking, all right, mate, take it easy.
No, it's great. Well, I started by writing that Leeds' other famous working class export, of course, is Lizz Truss. But
Is she from Leeds?
Yeah, she was at Leeds, yeah.
Oh, no. Was she born in Leeds?
No, she was born in Paisley, wasn't she?
Jesus
Gosh,
Christ. I'm not joking. I nearly threw myself out that window because that was news to me. My mortgage, I pay more on my mortgage directly because of her.
Lizz Truss, yeah, the Lizz Truss premium.
It's like twitching at Herbert Long when you mentioned her then. Then when you said she was from Leeds, I was like, no, please.
But like the job with Palace and the job covering Palace, and also this feeds into like the comedian stuff as well.
Yeah.
When you get closer to these people that you idolise and so on, does it change?
What do you mean?
Well, you sort of look up to footballers growing up and so forth, right? And then you're kind of like reporting them, you're saying you're getting to know them and whatever. Like, how does the kind of relationship, the working relationship, change?
I think externally changes. Internally, I'm still that giddy 11-year-old boy who loves football. So I warm up on Fantasy Football League on Sky, and Eberiche Eze, my absolute favourite player on planet Earth right now. His cousin is Andrew Mensah, who's one of the co-hosts of the show. And so Eze came to one of the recordings, and I went, usually when I finish a warm-up, because I've got a wife and kids, I'm invariably putting on my jacket and going home, because I'm up early for the school run. But I found out that Eze was there, and I went into the green room, and it's hilarious. I just, as I say, I was that gibbering. I just want to say thank you for everything that you've done for Christmas. And I was so starstruck that I wish I'd asked for a picture, but we'd had such a pure moment that I almost didn't want to sully it with the.
Yeah.
And that's a lie. I really, to this day, I still kick myself that I didn't get that picture. But even now, I mean, I'm like, sorry for this appalling clang, but I would consider myself like a good friend of, say, John Bishop's, and I've worked with John a lot, been John's warm-up guy for a lot. I'm out with him tomorrow night, in fact. But there's still a part of me when I'm chatting with John, there's still a little voice in my head going, "You're chatting with John Bishop?" When I go back to visit my folks in Leeds, the spare room that I still stay in has the John Bishop DVDs that I would watch before I got into comedy.
I am also going to come back to DVDs, but I will share this story of John Bishop. I've not done this before on this. We may end up cutting it out. One of the emails I got in 10 Downing Street, one of my favourite emails I ever got was from someone saying, "Do you want to come and see John Bishop in concert tonight?"
Yeah.
And I went back and I said, "No, but thanks so much for asking. I can't make it. I'd love to do it." And they said, I said, "One of my favourite comedians, so thanks for asking me." And they said, "Well, I know him really well, so why don't I bring him in to see you for a cup of coffee?" Amazing. And I was like, yeah, okay. Like, yeah, let's do it. And then I got a phone call a couple of days before from the person saying, "Just to let you know, he wants to lobby you on live comedy tax breaks, and he also wants to pitch to interview Theresa May." And I was like, okay. I mean, both like quite unlikely potentially, but I was like, bring him in. And I was like, and he took it really seriously. And after about 5 minutes, I thought there's something in this. And he gave me his pitch for why he should interview Theresa May. And I thought there's something in it. But I said to him, "Look, John, you are a Scouser, a socialist, and a comedian. If I was going to use 3 words to describe Theresa May, they'd be pretty a long way towards the bottom of what I'd pick." And he said, "Opposites attract." And I said, "Okay, all right." So
John said opposites attract.
Yeah.
Brilliant. So quick, straight away.
And it worked, but it was interesting because then I took it to the sort of diary bid meeting, because any request that came in had to go to the diary bid meeting, and I put it forward to the deputy chief of staff, and she was like, "Actually, there might be something in this. We've been thinking about, we need to do some stuff with PM that's a bit sort of different.
And then she's more relatable.
Yeah.
John, working class northerner.
And so she was like, Jimmy, go and road test him more. I was like, amazing. Right. So then it came to more and more things. And I got chatting to him more, liked him more. And we were talking about, as now it's quite strange looking. I was asking him a lot about his job and all the kind of different aspects of it. And I was like, how did you get into it? Etc. And I was like, did you do a stand-up course anywhere? And he was like, no, not really. But we were at this event, and we were at the Soccer Aid event in the Garden, and there were all these comedians there. So he brings over like Paddy McGuinness and Lee Mack. He's asking all these people, did you do a course in it? And so on. And like even Freddie Flintoff Boyle's over and all this. Clang, clang, clang. And they were like, no, the thing you should go and do is potentially Logan Murray's course. Anyway, so go and look into that. But I go home and tell my wife this story, and she was just like, you did what? I was like, I asked John Bishop whether he did like a week-long course in stand-up comedy. And she was like, you asked people that are at the very, very top of their game whether they did a week-long course in it. She's like, you advised the Prime Minister. How would you respond if somebody said, did you do a week-long course in that? She's like, it's so embarrassing.
Hang on, I'm with you on this.
Thank you. Well, I'm glad that somebody
You want to know the origin story. You want to know how they got into it.
Yeah,
I mean, crikey, how I got into it. I didn't do a course. So about 13 years ago, probably longer. Anyway, there's a landlord at the Nell Gwyn, a comedian called Rob Collins, but he's also a comedian. And I used to drink in the Nell Gwyn. And my mates would say to Rob, hey, our mate's funny. But there's a big difference between being the funny guy in the pub and being a comedian. And Rob goes, have you written any stuff? And privately, I had. And he goes, all right, come here on Thursday. Come in my office, and you're going to do your material for me. I was like, deal. So head over to the Nell Gwyn, got my notes, go into his office, and he goes, right, just so you know, I'm going to be, I won't use the word, but can't swear on this podcast, can I?
Yeah, you can.
All right, I'm all right. Let's just say he said, I'm not going to laugh, right? I can sidestep. And so I went through this material, and he did, despite himself, he laughed at some of the bits. And he goes, look, I've got a gig tonight in Tooting, the Castle, I think it was.
Oh, yeah.
He goes, come with me if you want. Come and watch. Tim Vine's on. I would love that. So we got on the tube to Tooting. And as we're getting near Tooting, he goes, just so you know, you're going to perform your first stand-up set tonight. I was like, are you joking? No. And he goes up to the guy around the night and he goes, put him on, do his first gig. The memory of it, my heart is racing. And so I did the set, started off all right, tailed off quite rapidly. Tim Vine, my first ever gig, Tim Vine followed me. He was doing new. And after the gig, Rob Collins said to me, he goes, just so you know, you won't sleep tonight. And I can still, in my mind's eye, I can still remember the walk from the pub to, I lived in Tooting, the euphoria just coursing through your veins. So yeah, that was my first ever gig, and sort of never.
And then yeah.
In fact, I mean, without getting too heavy, I'm more than 12 years sober, and so he's not over romanticizing or being melodramatic to say that I swapped my love of going out and getting absolutely cars in for my mates.
Yeah.
I swapped that. It was like a direct trade for doing as many gigs as I could. There's a guy called Ian Morris, co-created The In-Betweeners. I've known him since my 20s, and I'd got on the open mic circuit, and Ian said, how many gigs are you doing a week? And I said 2 or 3, and I was expecting Ian Morris to be like,
yeah.
And Ian Morris just pointed upwards as if to say, you need to be doing more than that. And I was with a friend called Paul, been friends since we were teenagers, and we walked from the pub to the tube station. And my friend Paul said, the only way you could do more gigs is if you knocked booze on the head. That night was the last night I ever touched alcohol. January the 11th, 2011. The drop sense. And certainly have done that.
Yeah.
The gigging a week went up from that moment.
And when did you think, or have you ever thought, I've made it? Or what was
yeah. I know the moment. And my wife knows the moment as well. Gone out for a meal. Me, my wife, my mum and dad. This would be about 9 years ago, I reckon. We we've been out in Crystal Palace. We get into a cab to go home, and I get an email on my phone. It's from the BBC, and Nick Helm has asked me to be his warm-up for Nick Helm's Heavy Entertainment. And so I get this in from the BBC. You know, Nick Helm has asked you, blah, 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 blah. These are the record days. And my wife said that she read the email, and for her, it was that moment of, oh, for God's sake. Because she realised that, I think she'd hoped that this was going to be like an itch I was going to scratch.
Yeah.
And, I don't need to do that comedy anymore. Whereas that was the moment where she went, oh, he can earn a king living from this. And so she knew that was the moment where it went from being a hobby where you might dream that you might make it, to that moment of someone saying, I actually think you're so good that I trust you to be my warm-up guy on this show. And then I'll be honest with you, the warm-up from there, I never looked back. So from that, Brett Goldstein had me as Catherine Tate's warm-up. I was then John Bishop's warm-up on the John Bishop show on BBC One, and it just sort of snowballed from there, really.
And this is a massive question, but what changes have you seen to comedy in that kind of time?
I think comedy's changed for the better.
That's an optimistic answer.
I really think comedy's changed for the better. Yeah, I mean, this term woke. People use this term woke as a put down, and I think they misuse it. So I was working on the John Bishop show on ITV, and we made this show during you might be a Conservative voter listening to this, so I'm objectively saying there was some pretty dodgy stuff going on. There was Partygate, there was the Nadine Zahawi, the tax, shall we say, affairs.
Yeah.
There was a lot of stuff going on, and because it was a topical comedy show, we were writing jokes to reflect things that were happening in the news. And the episode would go out, and people were putting on Twitter, like aimed at John, "You've gone woke," and you're like, calling it how is calling it corruption's not, that's not woke. So I think woke, this whole woke war thing, I think people use this term, they bandy it about and use it to suit their own agenda. Sorry, to answer your question, if in comedy now you can't use a slur or say something awful about someone that's going to upset someone, that's surely a good thing. Like, Harry Hill, I know it's a big clang, but again, I'm good friends with Harry, been his warm-up guy, done a lot with Harry. Harry, his big thing is, what is the intent? And that's got to be that's got to be it. What is the intent?
But it's partly people wanting to be outraged, right? Like I saw it was quite.
People want to be outraged, and I think those very same the people that say you can't say anything these days because people are so easily offended, and then as soon as you say something that upsets them, they're the very people that are clutching their pearls.
Yeah.
They want to have their cake and eat it.
But it was like, because I saw we're recording this like a few days after George Osborne's got married, right? And they pulled that stunt with the orange confetti on him. I saw people getting so angry about it, like on Twitter, and I was just like, I can't believe they'd ruined their wedding day. And I was like, I don't know Osborne particularly well, but I was like, I really doubt you've ruined his day. Like, it's just.
I listened to the News Agents podcast. Emily Maitlis and John Sopel were at the wedding.
Yeah.
They said on a recent episode they didn't even see it.
Yeah.
So the confetti incident, and they said, look, we're both journalists. How bad is it that we're admitting that we've not seen it? But it was such a minuscule event, the confetti thing, that it wasn't even in full view of everyone. So it was such a minor thing. And I don't want to get the podcast shut down, but I'm pretty certain there was something else that came out around that time that was probably more upsetting for the bride and groom. And I'll tell you what, mate, it wasn't having some confetti thrown
about it. Yeah.
I think we can say that without.
Yeah. I mean, look, it was referenced in the papers quite a lot and stuff, so I think it's fine. But what's the process for writing? Because you talk there about like your first thing of like, oh, have you written anything? Because writing is like massively different to delivery. Like you can write all you want, but like,
mate, I used to work at a magazine, and there was a guy that worked there, and he wanted to be a comedian. He'd say to me like, "Oh, I've written loads," and I'm like, that doesn't mean anything.
Yeah,
you got to get up there. When I first started, Tim Vine, I used to ask him for advice a lot, and he always replied. I mean, fair play to the guy. But ultimately, what it all comes back to is there's no substitute for pointing to the spotlights here. He always says there's no substitute for standing under the spotlights. And my advice to anyone who wants to get into comedy, you've just got to do it. I think some people are waiting for that magic wand to be waved, and maybe in a way I was, but you've just got to go out there and do it.
Well, I mean, it's one of the reasons that we want to do more comedians on the show is partly, I think it is inherently quite entrepreneurial. Like you've got to get up and get started, right? Because like that's it. And then, it is freelance, but you're, like you say, you work out. How do you structure your days then at the moment? So you're doing this like almost every night, right? And you're doing the school runs. So then what do you do in the day?
So during the day, because we put on so many shows, there's lots and lots of admin that goes with it.
Yes.
So there's booking the shows. I've got this newsletter, this fabled Always Be Comedy newsletter, because we're always putting on shows for the Always Be Comedy newsletter. So
we'll put a link to that in the show.
So what I would say is what we want. We want people to come to the regular Always Be Comedy shows. That's where you find out about the newsletter. Because what you don't want are the Johnny-come-latelys that are only coming to the newsletter shows, because that is the equivalent of supporting your local football team but only attending when they're playing Man United. Right. So I'll get an email from someone saying, "How do I join this?"
We won't put a link.
No, but I'll get an email. Tim and I get a lot of emails. Oh, how do I join this newsletter? And we're always like, go to the gigs, dude. You go to the gigs, that's how you find out. So we might put on a secret newsletter show featuring, someone like, say, a Joe Lice or a Kevin Bridges or a Katherine Ryan, etc.
Joe Lice is really having like a moment in terms of like using the platform to be kind of like campaigning on issues that he cares about. And he's more influential than most politicians.
There's a great example of someone who where's the intent? That guy's always punching up. He's always truth to power. Is that the phrase that I'm after? But he's always fighting on the side of good. And that last tour show of his was an absolute masterpiece. He's that dude is an absolute powerhouse and not just a hero of comedy, but just a hero, full stop. And what he's achieved, absolute more power to him. He's beloved for a reason. Also, what I'd say about Joe Lice, that is not an act. Some people on stage, hey, I'm your lovable best friend, and then off stage, Jesus Christ, that's quite an act you're putting on there. Whereas with Lice, he's just Joe is Joe 24/7. Great dude.
Do you think that is one of the ways that comedy is changing? Is partly because of social media, it's harder to be an act in the very traditional sense of acting a different role.
Alan Carr, in his first autobiography, Look Who It Is, which is a hilarious book. I was on a train from London to Leeds, and was he pulled into Leeds, I had my headphones on, I'd read his, read a lot of his book on the train. A woman comes over, she goes, "What are you reading?" And I said, "Alan Carr's Look Who It Is." I said, "Why do you ask?" "I didn't realise this." She says, "You've not stopped laughing for 2 hours, 20 minutes. But in this book, he and I think about this a lot, the audience have a much better inbuilt bullshit detector than I think people realise. And so they can tell who's authentic and who's not authentic. They can tell when a story's fake and when a story's real. And Joe Lice is the real deal,
Yeah. Totally. And so just going back to the days and the...
Oh, yeah, sorry. So I would, so a day will be spent either I will write some gear that I will probably try out here. We might record it on the camera up there. Yeah. If it bangs, I might put it out on the socials. If it doesn't bang, Tim, you can drag that one into the recycling bin. Booking shows, doing the podcast. I will try where possible. I'll put in as many full days of comedy work as I can. If I'm writing on a TV show, I treat that. I once interviewed Emma Kennedy, the writer, author, broadcaster, and this is a good bit of advice. If you work from home, you treat it like you work in the local shop. So she made this noise. So she says 9 o'clock. She mimes opening a door and goes ding-a-ling, works a full shift, and then at say 5:30, ding-a-ling, end of shift. And so if I'm say writing on a TV show, if you're being hired to write on a show, you do a proper, really trying to watch the language here. You do a proper job. And so I treat that like I might have a half-hour break, have a sandwich, but then straight back.
And do you write with a team or what's that? I'm just fascinated.
Depends what
by
the
how
show
to-
is. I might write on a TV show, and there might be two of us on that day, and it's probably like a pal from the circuit, if you like.
Yeah.
And then we might have a Zoom meeting at the start of the day, do a load of writing, check in at lunch, compare notes. That can be really good because if it's a pal, they might read out what they've done, and I might go, "Oh, that's fantastic. What about this as a tag?" And they're like, "Yeah." And then the afternoon, more writing, check back at the end. But if it's solo, then it's just you, and you can spend a full day writing. You might think you've written. I've had that where I've written on a show. I've written gags that I thought were the absolute bankers. I've included some that I didn't have that much confidence in, and then the show goes out, and they've gone with the ones that you personally weren't that keen on, and the ones that you thought were standing ovation will never see the light of day. But that's just how it goes, you know.
That's just the nature of it. And so, let's talk about that. Like, you had a great phrase for the kind of like golden generation in one of your podcasts. I think it was the one with Josh Widdicombe where you talked about what is it that you think kind of made that sort of generation special and delivered, unlike the fabled England golden generation?
It was the quality and the quantity, and it was. I mean, we can reel them off now. We would hit 20 names easily, and they just came through. They all came through at the right time, and they all fulfilled their potential. And this is not false modesty to say that with Always Be Comedy we got lucky, and it does sound like false modesty, and I do apologise. So we launched just over 12 years ago, and when we launched, these are the guys that were coming through as newer acts. Romesh Ranganathan, Rob Beckett, Sarah Pascoe, Aisling Bea, Katherine Ryan, Ed Gamble, Nish Kumar, James Acaster. Widdicombe was probably, last leg was probably about to launch, so he was sort of already breaking through. Rachel Parris, the likes of, say, Sean Walsh are probably going for a bit. Bridges was probably a star by then. Definitely was a star by then, actually. But I'd have missed so many. When I get to sleep tonight, I'll worry about the Tom Allen. There you go. Susie Ruffle. Kerry Godliman, Joan Brister. On and on and on. Brister probably had a couple more. Anyway, that whole group. That group. A lot of those dudes sell out tours. They've won BAFTAs. They're stars on both. Someone like Aisling Bea has had huge success in America as well. That group. Oh, Joe Lice. Got to.
He's already had his own segment.
But sorry, Joe. That group. I mean, that is astonishing, isn't it?
I mean, yeah, it's exceptional, and it's a great credit to British creativity as well.
Also, I've got to give credit to all those guys, because all those guys plus all the other guys I've not mentioned, and I feel terrible. So they were all playing Always Be Comedy as we launched, and they thank God that Rhys James, Bob Griffith, they still come back now. So before, when Kevin Bridges say, Kevin was a star by then, but nevertheless, when say Kevin Bridges is prepping for a tour, I name check Kev because everyone on the circuit knows what I think of Kevin. I think he's a genius. I feel like how a musician must have felt being around the same time as I'm getting carried away. If you're a musician at the same time as Mozart, you can either like gnash your teeth with jealousy or just be so grateful that you're around at the same time as Mozart. And Bridges, honestly, I don't think he gets the credit he deserves. If you go back and revisit all his specials, they hold up like a Beatles album. I mean, that kid he's in his 30s, but that guy is such a ferocious talent. Anyway, so when Kevin is prepping for a tour or trying out new material, whenever he's down here, he'll pop in here, and it's such a special thrill to have those dudes come back. But then also, it's also very important to champion the new talent. And so, you join us here today, and tonight we've got Josh Pugh,
which I'm really jealous about.
Who is, if you've never heard of Josh Pugh, if you're wondering who that next superstar is, then put the mortgage on Josh Pugh.
What's the future of comedy money, though, in terms of these guys creating it? So, we'll come back to that, and we'll use Josh Pugh as an example. You talked about in your podcast, Always Be Comedy, the really enjoying people's rise to success and notoriety.
I enjoy their rise to success more than they do. 100%.
Totally, right? And
Yeah.
I thought it's such a lovely line. And that's like such a good kind of description as you want in a phrase. You talked about it specifically, I think it was about Romesh. And but is there any sort of, you said it there about the Mozart example, but is there any sort of, would you ever want that sort of lame of fame? I mean, there can't be many more recognisable people than Romesh Ranganathan at the moment.
I have such a happy life. Try not to cry here, but I would be a fool to complain about my lot or pine for, crikey, if I was to ever pine for more than what I've already got, then I would need it. I'd say to one of my girls, I would be sat down and given a good talking to. When I was a child, Dustin G passed away backstage during a pantomime with Les Dennis. My teacher helped me write a letter to Les Dennis in which I told him that my dream was to be a comedian. So to sit here at the age of 45, fine, I'm not Jerry Seinfeld in terms of star power, but I'm a comedian. I perform pretty much every night. I own my own company. I perform on my terms. We have a podcast. I've got a wonderful friendship circle. I'm surrounded by this golden generation. I get to stand there night after night. I'm pointing to a bar that's like 7 yards away, and I get to watch the likes of, say, Stephen Merchant, Jack Whitehall, Sarah Pascoe, and on and on and on and on. Nish Kumar, gee, I mean, what a talent he is. Life is pretty sweet, and so if I was to sit here and say that I wish I could swap places with Romesh, I would be, frankly, an idiot.
But I think that's such a good way to look at life, though. Like,
one thing that you will meet people in life, not just in comedy, and they complain about their lot, and you just think, I think some people don't realise how lucky they are.
Yeah, right.
And it is important to. I don't want to sound like some. I mean, look, I'm here with a notepad that says "gold digger" on the front. So if I sound like someone that is banging to self-help, then you are absolutely correct. Yeah.
What's the origin story behind that book?
So I got into self-help. I got the Paul McKenna "Change Your Life in 7 Days" book. When I was covering Crystal Palace, actually, that is the impact that the club will have on you. They drove me to self-help. So Paul McKenna's "Change Your Life in 7 Days" was sort of like the gateway drug to self-help. And I've sort of like completed self-help. So now a lot of it is guff, and a lot of it, I think there are a lot of snake oil salesmen out there. And from working, when I worked at Balance, I was the deputy editor on this wellness mag, and myself and the editor, we would have these sorts of frank exchanges, and we both agreed there are some people who are in it for stardom, or they're in it for the wrong reasons. But if you can, I think with self-help, personal development, call it what you like, if you can cherry pick the little things that work for you, then I think it's quite a shrewd thing to do. Even now, to this day, I was having this chat with Tom Allen that I'd like to write down goals before certain shows. Can't do it for every gig here because I'd run out of pens, but I once interviewed Dan Carter, the greatest rugby player who's ever lived.
Wow.
Now, some people call it manifesting, if you're into that sort of thing. But Dan Carter, who's very much both feet on the ground, he would call it goal setting. And Dan Carter would write these goals, and it would be things like be the greatest kicker on the planet and things like that. And he said that at the start of one season, every single goal that he wrote came true. And a member of the All Blacks coaching staff, I think he became the number one player on the planet, like statistically was like officially. Yeah. And one of the All Blacks coaching staff came into the changing rooms. I nearly said dressing room. That's showbiz for you. Came into the change rooms and deliberately trod on his feet. And Dan Carter goes, "What are you doing?" And the guy goes, "I'm making sure that both those remain firmly on the ground." And I love all stuff like that. I love. So that's why I've got this Gold Digger book. Because Tom Allen found out that I was into all this stuff, and then as a thank you, we'd done some shows together, and so as a thank you, he got me it's in my bag, this black leather book that he wants me to write in. That's why I use that as my pre-show notebook.
I think that's great. Manifesting, I think, is really interesting because another word for manifesting is daydreaming.
Well, there's a famous Jim Carrey clip on YouTube, and he says, I know, like Tim, who I run ABC with, he's more grounded. He would call it goal setting. But I've interviewed people like Rhonda Byrne. I mean, I think it's essentially the same sort of thing, really. Setting goals is sort of the same as manifesting.
Yeah.
But there's a famous Jim Carrey clip on YouTube where he says, you can't just write down, I want to make $20 million a picture and then make a sandwich. You've got to, it's not like just magic. I want a gold helicopter to land outside. You've got to put the work in, you know?
Oh yeah, totally. But yeah, you have. But that vision, that whole kind of like visualizing thing, I do think, like, you know, part of it is daydreaming and actually letting yourself go away with.
Sorry,
dreams.
you're absolutely correct.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
I was just like,
But daydream, but you've then got to do something about.
oh,
totally.
You know, totally. And but then think, okay, what are the steps to kind of get there and so on. Let's go back to Josh Pugh as an example, because
Yes.
I have seen his videos, I would say every day for the last few weeks and whatever. I think he's brilliant. He's doing all kinds of comedy and it's just brilliant. But I have not given him a penny, and he's given me lots of entertainment already. What's the future of kind of like the comedy economy, to use a phrase to make him on the spot?
So
Like,
Josh Pugh's a great example. Josh Pugh has set himself it's almost like a challenge where he puts out a new video, fresh piece of video content every single Monday. And he's been doing that for well over a year, I think now.
yeah.
And what's happened there is, and it does help if you're a comedy genius. And so,
talent.
so what? Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. The gear's got to be good. You can't just, I'm going to commit to put a video out every Monday. The video will be total, but nevertheless, I put it out every Monday. So the product has to be good. And Josh's product isn't just good, it's great. So he puts these videos out every single Monday. And because of that, he's accumulated this following. So say his Twitter following has gone from a couple of thousand to, I think, like 70 or 1,000 off the back of these, you know, hilarious videos, as well as brilliant jokes as well. And it's not just the videos. He's such a great writer. And so and not just on Twitter, or, you know, across the socials, I'm not sure how many Instagram followers. He'll have a lot of Instagram followers through these videos. And then you accumulate a fan base so that when he announces, say, a show like tonight or a tour,
Yeah.
he's got these guys ready and waiting because they might never have seen him live before. They might have only seen the videos. And so if Josh is playing at a town near them, when he announces that tour or that show, they can't believe their luck and be on the bang, you know, they're there.
Yeah. It's interesting. Do you think it's different in the States because there's a bit more of a tipping culture though? Because I'll
Oh, do you mean like this Ko-Fi thing, or is it Buy Me a Coffee and all that?
yeah, like
Some people, I mean, some comedians do that, and which is fair enough. If you know, if they're spending hours and hours every week making these videos, editing them, and you know, writing them, and so on, you know, that's one way that some dudes do it. But with Josh, I think it's been more about, because he's some of those guys aren't necessarily stand-ups, the ones that are doing the Buy Me a, is it, you pronounce it Ko-Fi?
yeah. I don't like
The guys that do that, whereas Josh is such a pure comedian. If Josh, you know, Josh is just funny, just falls off him. You know, he's I'm gonna use the term pure comedian for the fourth time in about 10 seconds. So for Josh, it's more about being in rooms. He loves smashing gigs and getting followers that way. So you might have not given him a penny yet, but I suspect maybe when that next tour gets announced, maybe you'll. That's how I'll get you. That's how I'll get your money next.
That's how I
time,
get my money. Yeah, no, but it's like it's true, right? Because the other example of where I did it of money was the Parenting Hell podcast, and when they launched the book, because I just thought I'm literally getting like 2 hours of content a week that I listen to. Like the least I can do is chip out 15 quid for a book.
But again, that's another good example. You know, Josh Widdicombe, Rob Beckett, two outstanding comedians. That podcast, what an incredible idea, hugely successful. Off the back of that, you can buy the book. You can go see their tours. And then also you can go see them, you know, individually. They're also two of the best comedians around. So, you know, whenever next time either those guys are on tour, people might have come to them via the podcast. You know, it's all, I'm not saying that, I don't think for a second they would have They would have had this in mind when they launched the podcast. But with retrospect, what a very clever thing to do.
Yeah, totally right. Yeah. And what has social media improved comedy, do you think?
Hands down. Absolutely. Because there's not, you and I could sit here now and reel off some of the greatest sitcoms of all time, right? And we would go say, let's go Fawlty Towers. All right, it's not really a controversial list, this. Fawlty Towers, Porridge, Blackadder, The Office, etc. But unfortunately, there isn't as much TV comedy getting made as there was. That is a fact. Because I guess there are other ways of seeking out comedy. You can watch the clips on YouTube, you go on TikTok, go on Instagram. And so social media is a brilliant way for comedians to get their clips out there. So some comedians, we have a camera up there. Some comedians will record themselves, or maybe they've done stand-up on TV shows, and they will clip them up and they will put them out as 1-2 minute clips, and they can go viral that way. There's a comedian called Jen Brister, absolute undeniable room slayer. Jen Brister has been undeniable for nearly 20 years. Just a fantastic comedian, beloved by comedians, beloved by audiences. She's in I probably shouldn't say how old she is, but she's a mother. I don't use the word veteran. Jen will clip me around the ear up, but Jen's been going a while, and then she starts putting clips up on TikTok and Instagram. Now, once again, it goes back to the gear has got to be good. The product's got to be good. Jen's gear isn't just good, it's phenomenal. And so she was going viral, clip after clip after clip. This tour, she's just recently extended this Optimist tour. I sound like Jen's publicist. She's just extended this tour. But as part of this tour, I know for a fact, because she's a mate, she put on the Leicester Square Theatre, sold it out. Put on a second day at Leicester Square Theatre, sold it out. Put on a gig at Alexandra Palace, sold that out. Put on a second gig at Alexandra Palace. And this is all off the back of sharing clips on social media. I mean, that's a wonderful thing, isn't it?
And that's the job of the future, doing all that social stuff as well.
That was a great plug. Well done.
So comedians often kind of joke about sort of doing corporate gigs as being the kind of like really sort of lucrative work, but they also say they're really quite hard, right? Because you haven't necessarily got a room of people that are really ready to laugh, right? They're kind of almost being forced fun, organised fun from corporates. What's been your experience of corporate gigs?
At the risk of sounding like I'm plugging Always Be Comedy on the QVC shopping channel and you reach across and strangle me. This is a characteristically sickeningly positive answer. But I think because we love putting on the comedy shows, that sort of shines through when we do the private shows. So we did a show for a company called Contagious relatively recently. They're like an ad agency, and it was myself and Reece James. And this company, now on paper, I'm well aware that, like you say, a lot of comedians joke about corporates being hard. But because
very lucrative, to be fair.
But because this company, I think, was so grateful that this was like such a break from the norm. They're out of the office. They've been taken to this venue. There was this Always Be Comedy show. There was Reece James, star of Mock the Week, and it was the energy in the room. I know this is so positive. It was like we were doing an actual gig. And so,
that's cool.
So when we try to give the same levels of energy and love and commitment to these private shows. You're getting paid for these things as we would a regular Always Be Comedy gig. And so that's how we sort of stage them. So whether it's, it might be, I would always MC it, but people like, Rachel Parris, Sunil Patel, someone like Reece James, Josh Pugh, Joe Caulfield. So we book these Always Be Comedy acts. So these companies are still getting that Always Be Comedy show, so that it never feels too, because from what I hear from other places, it can feel a bit stale or a bit forced, a bit contrived. So I think with Always Be Comedy, the thing is, as you can tell by the manic way that I talk, it's just attacking everything with this enthusiasm and this absolute love and passion for comedy. Because what you get on the circuit, you get these jaded hacks.
Yeah.
I'm like the opposite of that. I've been going for 13 years. I love comedy. I mean, I've nearly cried during this podcast about 8 times. I love comedy more now than I did when I started 13 years ago. And I'm confident that will always continue.
Amazing. I once had Al Murray do a pub quiz at a corporate, and that was very good as well. So it's like you can be quite creative with like... Yeah.
Al Murray is you couldn't have picked a more perfect person. He's such a hero to me. Someone like Al Murray, Harry Hill, Stuart Lee, these guys, I think, they won't thank me for this, I think they've got more than 100 years of experience between them.
Yeah.
And what they've got is love of the game. So when those guys come down here in a room like this, they're doing it because they love comedy. I once said to Harry Hill, I says, "You do this for love of the game, don't you?" He was like, "Yeah, absolutely." And that's. I think anyone listening to this podcast, doesn't matter what field of work you work in, I hope some of you are nodding along. Whatever you do, you've got to have the love of the game.
That is a brilliant way to end the show. James Gill, thanks very much. I'll
Thanks
always
for
be
having
comedy. You can't sign up to the newsletter in the show notes, but
Whatever you do not sign up to the newsletter.
But we will put all the links to all the things in the show notes. Thanks so much for coming on Jimmy's Jobs of the Future.
Thanks ever so much.